Well, thank you all for coming tonight, and thank the people on YouTube. Thank you very much. So we're continuing with the Lalitavistara Sutra, the play in full. We're on chapter 26, which we've been on for a few weeks now. This is turning the wheel of Dharma. So we've been taking our time with this, talking about discussing each of the verses and their profound meaning. So today we are on a moment here. We begin on verse 26.81. So does anybody have any questions or comments about anything that we've discussed so far, or anything that you'd like to discuss that we're not doing? Okay. So, let's see this one. So we need to read. So this next recitation is the sixth recitation within this. So this will go through 2697. So it's not that much in terms of pages, but it goes into the 12 links of interdependent origination. So it bears a little bit of discussion. So let me see. So we've had Alex. Are you in a position to read tonight? Well, I guess not. Alex, we can't hear you. All right. All right. Well, then I'm going to read um, these next.
Sorry, sorry, it was something stuck with my phone again. But yes, I can read. I can read. I can start if you want.
All right. Well, if you can read 26.81 through 2697, please. And then we'll pause and have a discussion.
2681, starting with on this topic, right?
Yes.
Okay. So, I don't know, should we revisit what is this topic?
Well, go ahead. Yeah. Read dot 80 and then
Mm-hmm.
continue on. So that's a good point. Go ahead.
All right. So, from the top of the page, now this is
26.80.
yes. However, monks, once I had recited the four truths of the noble ones 3 times, I developed the wisdom that sees their 12 aspects. At that point, my mind was free and my inside was now free and pure. Monk, at that point, I declared that I had awakened to unsurpassable, perfect, and complete Buddhahood. My wisdom vision had been developed. My birth has been exhausted. I had carried out my religious practice. I had done what needed to be done, and I will not have another life. On this topic, it is said, and there is reference 419. With the melody of Brahma and the voice of Kinara, emanating trillions of light rays, he who had cherished the truth for so many millions of aeons, the self-arisen Sakyamuni, spoke these words to Kaundinya. The eyes, ears, and nose are impermanent and baseless. Likewise, the tongue, body, and mind are also suffering, without self, and empty. They are lifeless matter, inert like hay or a wall. There is no self here, neither a person nor life force. All phenomena are causally produced. Beyond limits and without consciousness, they are like space. There is no agent and likewise no one who feels, and no action that can be observed as performed, be it good or bad. Suffering arises based on aggregate. The water of craving makes it grow. On the path, the aggregates are perceived to be equality of phenomena, infinitely diminished in harmony with the law of they cease. Through conceptual thinking, which is superficial, ignorance arises. It has no other source. When you eliminate the cause of formation, there is no passing on. Consciousness arises dependent on passing on. Likewise, name and form appear from consciousness. From name and form, the sixth sense field appears. When joined with these sixth sense field, it is said that contact appears, and contact produces the three kinds of feelings. When the smallest feeling is said to be accompanied by craving, even the smallest feeling is said to be accompanied by craving, and craving produces all forms of clinging. The clinging in turn perpetuates all existence, and based on existence, one's birth occurs. Rooted in birth, the stages of old age, sickness, and death follow. In this web of existence, there are many types of birth. Likewise, all beings appear from conditions, and no self or person who transmigrate. With no self or person who transmigrate. Whoever has no thought or concept has found the true way. Whoever has found the true way has no ignorance. Whoever has brought this ignorance to a halt has exhausted all forms of existence for good. The awakened one, the thus gone one, the self-arising one, has severed this causation within himself. Buddha can only mean someone who knows all causality. It does not refer to the aggregate, sense sources, and elements. There is no place here for the heretics of other schools. Here, in such practice of Dharma, emptiness has been proclaimed. Those beings who are fortunate enough to understand this teaching, and those who studied and were purified under previous Buddhas. Those beings who are fortunate enough to understand this teaching are those who studied and were purified under previous Buddhas. When the wheel of Dharma was turned with its 12 aspects, Kaundinya understood the meaning, and so the three jewels came to be: the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. These are the three jewels even up to the palace of Brahma. The news went out from person to person. The protector of the world has turned a stainless wheel. The three jewels, which are so rare in this world, have now appeared. The five monks, Kaundinya and the rest, along with 60 million gods, purified the eye of Dharma. Others, however, say that there were 80 million deities present from the realm of form. The vision was purified at the time of the turning of the wheel of Dharma. The 84,000 humans who had congregated there purified their eyes and were liberated from all the unfavorable rebirth.
Okay, thank you very much. Does anybody have a comment on this right now?
Lance, I think for reading it, the most immediate component that is very instructive is really understanding 2686. Well, obviously 2685. Sorry, 84, 85, 86, which talks about just where the desires start happening, like where consciousness starts coming, the desires start coming, and the clinging and grasping through the sense field. That immediately jumps out because I think it's fundamental to understand as a practitioner, like why you keep ending up being born.
Well, I think there's two things here. One is that what he's describing, without saying it, directly, is that these are the 12 links of interdependent origination. And then within the 12 links are the 5 skandhas. So what you were just referring to specifically were the 5 skandhas. So I think that's important to note, and to put this into that context, to be able to understand this in the context of that. And then later on at 2693, then the 3 jewels are being identified. So being able to see this as the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha as being the embodiment of this, as the actors within all this. So keeping that in mind, that's why we need to go back and break this apart, put it back together again with the understanding of how this operates. So the first 12 was what we talked about last week, when there was the recitation of the 4 the 4 truths being recited 3 different times, and each time one was understanding, one was knowing what to be done, and one was having accomplished it, having finished it. So that was the 12. Now we're with this group here. Now we're talking about the 12 links of dependent origination. So the 12 links. Does anybody want to talk about the 12 links? What are the 12 links? To identify them first. And this might be something that you want to jot down if you don't have it handy.
Lance, I just want to, before we go further, what's something that's was striking to me, but maybe we could elaborate a little bit on that. Like, as a scientist, I'm a scientist, still. We use a lot of conceptual thinking, and in our conceptual thinking, we are thinking that we making things a little bit more clear, or kind of more understood, if we use conceptual thinking to sort of like get things, rationalize things, sort things out, and stuff like that. But here it says that this is often actually superficial, and from that ignorance arises, which actually um, I want to say that I agree. And in which way do I agree? Like, we oftentimes create like a model of how things supposed to work. We think how things supposed to work, but that's not all the truth. So oftentimes we're trying to figure out how something is working, but we don't have a complete information. So we have like a temporary approximation how things are working. But oftentimes when we do that long enough, we start thinking that this is actually the real thing. And then, then eventually we discover, oh, that's not the real thing. The atom can be split further, and there are quarks and little brains and whatever string theory and more and more and more, and there seems to be like no end in that, right? So, but what I may bit struggle with understanding is when they say when you eliminate when you eliminate the cause of formation, there is no passing on. Consciousness arises dependent on passing on. So what kind of passing on they're talking about here? Is it like between going from like living to Bardo, one life to another life? What are you thinking? Is it about the consciousness like as our own individual self, having concept about ourselves, and so on and so forth? Like what is he really talking about here?
Well, I think it's a good question, and I think we have to establish, what the palette is. What are we talking about here? What's the context of this discussion? So I think it's important to, have in our mind what the 12 links are, what the 5 skandhas are, and then from that be able to use that as the context of which these verses are drawing on.
Mm-hmm.
So what are the 12 links?
Oh, that's your question?
That's that's the first question, so that we can have the discussion about, well, what's the context of all of this? The 12 links and the 5 skandhas.
Yeah, it seems like, to me, the context is like about consciousness, and how come the consciousness, which we think is ourselves, how come it has experience? It kind of like senses light or senses touch or other feelings that we have. It can be like internal feelings of joy or hatred or whatever. And like, where is all this coming from, and why all this suddenly causing us some kind of suffering?
Yes.
And why are we caught up in this? Why do we constantly want to feel something? What causes us? Why don't we just withdraw from this experience? Why we keep going in this loop?
So what is the first link of interdependent origination?
Ignorance.
Correct. And what is the second link?
Well, I want to argue with that, because he says that the ignorance arises from conceptual thinking. So on the one hand, there may be something before that, but it may be going in a cycle. So you can pick any place that you want with.
Well, I got to be honest with you and tell you I'm having a hard time following your logic, because it's not hanging on anything that I can refer back to. I need a little bit more concept.
Should we just name them so everyone on YouTube can hear them? Should we just name?
Yes, that's,
Okay.
Yeah.
Ignorance, volitional
let me
formations,
slow down so people can write them.
volitional formations.
What's volitional formations?
I don't, that's a big con.
Mental formations.
Okay.
Yeah,
Conscious,
it's like we think something is really existing, like, oh, like uh,
Uh,
I want to
formation
get some
is-
pleasure. So we have a concept of pleasure, and now we're like seeking for pleasure. Where is that pleasure?
3 is consciousness, Lance.
That's right.
4 is name and form. 5 is the 6 sense fields. 6 is the contact. 7 is feeling tone.
Is what?
Feeling tone.
Feeling tone,
sensation. It's
sensations.
the
Yeah,
Dharma, the Dharma.
Touch.
the sensations, feelings.
Feeling sensations. 8 is craving. 9 is clinging. 10 is becoming. 11 is birth. 12 is old age and death. So those are the 12 in sequence.
Okay, so having those now, then we should have in front of us also, out of those 12, 5 of them are classified as the 5 skandhas, the 5 heaps, the 5 aggregates of what it is to be a human being. So these 12 links of interdependent origination was the sequence of what a being goes through. But now we're talking specifically about these skandhas. What are those 5 skandhas?
Probably the starting from ignorance, or
So then we start out with form, body,
Mhm.
and then we talk about mental formations or projections, or excuse me, perceptions. That's what I mean to say. Perceptions. Is that right, Bernie?
That's how I recall it. Yes, my memory's not always 100%, but yeah, perceptions, and then
Perceptions.
feelings. Positive or negative feelings, pleasure or pain. Then comes samskara, which is mental formations, and 5th is consciousness.
So say them again. So what's the first one? Is form,
Form,
right?
perception,
Right.
feeling,
Yeah.
mental formations, and consciousness. Mental formations,
Concepts is another way.
concept.
Is another way of saying concepts.
It's everything that takes place in your mind, the emotions and everything else. It's a list. It's a big list of things in Abhidharma, and it's everything that happens in your mind, which isn't consciousness. It's really not just thoughts, but it's all your mental habits and everything. So there's really no good word for it in English. So
Okay.
Mhm.
So, and then consciousness is the 5th one.
consciousness is the 5th one, right?
So those are the 5 skandhas, or the 5 heaps, the 5 aggregates of what it is to be a human being, of an active, thinking, performing human being. Does anybody have any questions right now, or
so
we're not going too far off on a tangent? Let's keep it to this right now, that we can understand that this is the framework on which we need to talk.
So when we say the form, that means like our physical body form that
Correct.
we move, and
Correct. The physicality.
the physicality there.
Yes.
So and all these other emotions and forms and consciousness, they kind of within the body or around the body, we can say sometimes. Whatever.
Right.
Mhm.
It's taking into consideration what the organs are, what the eyes are, what the senses are, are all reflected here. Okay. All right. So then let's go back to the beginning now of this section, if we can. If everybody's got this framework on which we need to speak. We need to think about this. So he says, this last line on verse 81, he says, the self-arisen Sakyamuni, which is Buddha, spoke these words to Kaldinya, and Kaldinya was one of his 5 disciples, the 5 friends who then has now become the 5 disciples, and Kaldinya is one of those 5, just so you know, if you haven't looked it up. So then the next verse, dot 82, says the eyes, ears, and nose are impermanent and baseless. So those are the devices that we use within our body to be able to recognize things around us. And then the second line says, likewise, the tongue, body, and mind are also suffering without self and without empty. So he's saying that we have these facilities, but these facilities themselves are composite. They're not pure unto themselves. They don't exist as themselves. They are compounded of other things. Do we agree with that? Does everybody agree with that? Any thoughts about that? So then the next line says they are lifeless matter.
Biology, it's very easy to agree with.
What's that?
Whoever studied biology is very easy to agree with, I think.
Well,
yeah, they're all made of the same cells, basically same DNA, proteins, and they're just a little bit different in their function, you know.
Yes, and I'm not that smart, so I got to take it bit by bit. So then the next line says they are lifeless matter, inert like hay or wall, like a wall. So this is what you just said, I think. And then it says there is no self here, neither a person nor a life force. So we have these composite elements within ourselves, but we can't say that any of them is Lance or is Alex or is Brendan or anything like that. There's no individual self here. It's just that they're a composite of space matter or whatever you want to say. So then it says, the next line, the next verse says, all phenomena are causally produced. Now, what does that mean, causally produced? That they're produced by a cause. In our mind, we perceive something, we see something, we recognize something through these devices that we have, and we say that this is this or that, or we have a name for it. We develop some kind of a way to articulate what that is so we can remember it and communicate it to other people. So all phenomena are causally produced by their appearance. So what is the appearance? What is the cause of the appearance? It becomes that question. And then it says, beyond limits and without consciousness, they are like space. So these things are coming up like out of space. Does that make sense? Can we follow along and see, you know, how this is operating? Because this basis here is so fundamental that so much of what comes after this, all the practices and all the teachings and so on, are based on this very, very, very simple thing here that we take for granted. So we got to understand this, I think, to understand what comes later on. So not everybody is going to be schooled in this at this point right now, and we need to establish, you know, a point of reference for all of this.
Well, I think a lot of people can understand the causality, because like in school we taught physics that, you know, force acts on things and things like push things around, and one force produces another force, interaction, repulsion, whatever, and things happen. But what I may want to ask our more Dharma learned friends is, is what do you think is meant by space? Because in English, space used for many things. Like space is my little space, space as, you know, three-dimensional space. Space is outer space where we launch satellites.
Does
Like,
anybody have an answer for that question? Do you
Well,
want to go? You want to go there now, or you want to continue what I was doing?
I've got a strong,
It's akasha. The word space is akasha, and that's the only thing that's uncompounded.
Well,
That's-
Bernie was saying something.
Okay.
Sorry. Go
they're
ahead.
like space in that they have no concrete existence. What we consider to be phenomena are only names that we give to a fleeting reality, and to give it a kind of permanence where it really doesn't have any. So we can call, let's say, a movement, we can call a group of, my favorite example is a flock of birds. There's no flock of birds over and above the individual birds that make up the flock of birds. But because it appears to be a single thing, we call it a flock. In the same way, everything which we take to be phenomena have no real existence because they're simply compounds. They're made of, there's a conceptual framework that is imposed on a reality that is fleeting and divisible into its various parts. So in that way, it's like space. It has no,
oh, thank
has
you, Bernie.
no
I think
reality.
that helps. That helps clarify. So maybe in other words, we can say, like, it's more like vacuum. Like when we say vacuum, right?
Right, vacuum, right.
The word vacuum suggests there is something in there. What is it? Vacuum, right? But actually, vacuum has nothing in it. So basically, it's like absence of anything.
Right. The trouble is everybody's heard of Einstein, so they think that space is something because it has a certain geometry associated with it. But for pre-Einstein people, space is absolutely nothing.
Right.
All right. So how does this relate to the next two sentences in this verse? There is no agent, and likewise no one who feels, and no action that can be observed as performed, be it good or bad. So
So basically,
what's trying to be established here? Kunga, can you help with this? What do you think?
I think it's trying to establish the idea that our experiences are projections that our mind puts on the world that don't really exist. We say things are a certain way based on our past experiences, our karma, and if we had different karma, we would say things exist in a different way. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody have another point about that?
Sounds good to me. Sounds good to me.
yeah, I think it makes sense if you put it that way.
Okay. Zara, did you
I mean,
want
we can also
to
say
finish
that-
your thought that you started with before?
No, I don't need to. No, I'm good.
Okay.
And I think the word akasha is something like also negation, right? Is akasha, so it's
Yeah.
kind of like
Yeah,
void.
is the negative particle
Yes.
in Sanskrit, so it's a negation, really.
Yeah.
And the
I don't think there's a good English translation exactly for this. And so, like from the Indian Sanskrit, so I think the closest they're able to say is they just call it space, which is getting at what we're describing right now. So, but that's the closest word I've come to.
Okay. All right. I don't want to lose anybody. Brendan, what do you think about what we're talking about so far?
I think I'm struggling with it, and you emphasized how important it is, and so I want to make sure I try to get it. So Bernie's explanation of the flock made perfect sense, but if I have a soup, right? I might have potatoes and I have a stock and I have some carrots and that kind of thing. The soup doesn't exist without all of its parts. But on the other hand, the soup is a handle on an idea, which is the fact that I'm not just eating a potato, I'm eating an aggregate of things which make it a soup. And so therefore there's some utility in that soup, that term soup, because it's a handle on an idea. I think the key word here that we were just reading is no one. There is no agent, and likewise, no one who feels, because there is no one, because we're just an aggregate of parts. But again, to quote Shakespeare, if you prick me, do I not bleed, right? If you prick me, I bleed. Lance doesn't bleed, right? So these are some of the obstacles that I'm wrestling with right now.
And that's fine. And that's good. And that's why, and this is what the Buddha here is trying to establish, is this ground. Where do we all come from? What is this? The 12 links are that ground. And we have to establish that in everybody's mind to be able to capture this. The Buddha thought enough about it to spend this amount of time on it. So that's what I'm trying to establish here, and not, like I said, not take this for granted.
And I think that was a good example. I just want to elaborate on that a little bit. And like soup, right? Who has authority to call something a soup? Only if you have been fed soup and told by your mother that this is a soup, then you will recognize it. Oh yeah, that's a soup. But somebody else that coming from, indigenous Aboriginal tribe of Australia, and they'll try that stuff and they say, that's not a soup. That's just a mixture of water and, something I never seen before.
Well, you're right. And so what, so convention comes out of this investigation, out of this, recognition of stuff. And then we start having convention of saying, well, we're going to call this soup, but in another part of the world, another language, other people are calling it something else. They look at the sun. Everybody sees the sun. But you go around the world and there's going to be what? 150 different names of the sun, but everybody sees the sun.
It's not the sun. Some things it's a god.
So the point is that we need to have this reference, this context in which we can begin this conversation, talk about this, and understand that this comes out of nothing. It comes out of phenomenal nature. This is all the exposition of phenomenal nature. It doesn't exist, but it's relatively existing. It doesn't exist on its own. It's a composite of many things. And so to be able to get to that point, to be able to look at that, gives you a basis on which to understand who we are as human beings. And that's the fundamental thing that we're trying to develop here, to recognize here.
I'd like to share that there's a story in Tibetan teachings about a glass of fluid. So it fits in nicely with this idea of the soup. And there's 3 different beings who are encountering this glass of fluid. There's a human being who sees a glass of water. There's a hell being who sees a glass of pus and blood. And there's a divine being who sees a glass of sweet nectar. And so it's one glass of fluid, but these 3 different beings who have different karmic backgrounds are forced to experience this fluid in completely different ways. It's a completely different fluid for each of them because of the way they sense their experience.
So it's all relative. It's all relative.
Yeah, I was thinking about a more down to home one is my wife loves olives and I hate them. I think they're disgusting, but for her, they're delicious. The same olive, right? It doesn't really have any different flavor. Doesn't taste terrible sometimes and delicious the other time, just that we have different background, different perceptions, different karma, about what tastes good and what doesn't taste good. So Thank
So
you.
this is exactly what we're trying to build on, to recognize that, to see the commonality and then to see the differences. Okay. So if I can go back to point 84, dot 84, it says suffering arises based on the aggregates. The water of craving makes it grow. On the path, the aggregates are perceived to be the equality of phenomena. Infinitely diminished in harmony with the law of decay, they cease. So it gets more and more abstract in these 4 lines. So suffering are based on the aggregates. So if we can say that we're trying to take these fundamental ideas here, and we're 6 people, and I'm saying one thing, Kunga's saying another, Bernie's saying another, Brendan says another thing, Alex says another thing, and then Zara says another thing. The only thing that I'm going to agree with that makes me feel good is what I say. But I'm suffering to hear what everybody else says. And what we're trying to get to is this point of how these aggregates are so fundamental and how we build on them and how our suffering comes out of these aggregates. We're talking about thoughts here, but we can be talking about, physicality. You don't like the way I look, and to look at me creates suffering in your mind. So we can take all these different examples and see how in one light you enjoy it, but in another light, somebody else does not enjoy it and finds it to be suffering. And that whole disparity between us 6 people becomes our collective suffering. And that's part of what the Buddha is trying to get to, is why are we suffering? Wasn't that his fundamental question?
Yes, that's what the Buddha's main goal was.
Yes.
He set out to.
So we'll make it more complicated as we go along, but right now let's keep it simple. So suffering arises on the aggregates. The water of craving makes it grow. The water of craving, in other words, the more that I want something, or you want something, is the water for it, the nourishment. It won't grow without that craving. It won't grow. Won't become more without it. But if you have plenty of that water of craving, your suffering grows. That's the point. If you can stop the craving, if you can stop that water of craving, then your suffering is going to be decreased. Does that make sense?
Oh, so that's talking about like the perpetual thoughts, or like when we keep thinking about one thing over and over.
Sure.
And it's self-aggrandized.
Yeah, Zara just said desire. Yeah, desires. So the more that we want that, the more our suffering increases. Because we begin to hang on to it. The craving is there. Then we start clinging on to it, probably is the next point they make. Then you start clinging on to it. And if it's taken away from you, you suffer. So on that point then, so the next line says, on the path, the aggregates are perceived to be the equality of phenomena. On the path of what? The path of Dharma, the path of awakening. The aggregates, what we're talking about here, the skandhas, what it is to be a human being, are perceived to be the equality of phenomena. In other words, we can agree that we're all human beings and we all have different likes and dislikes, but at the same time, we all have the same aggregates. We still have form. We still have perception. We still have feelings. We all still have concepts, and we all have consciousness. That's a constant in being a human being. Right?
So it basically says we should treat ourselves, our aggregates, our mind, our feelings, our not as just something permanently existent in its own, but we should think of it as phenomena. We just come and go. They just appear like rain and disappear. They stop, they come and go, stop, begin and cease. And we shouldn't be too much attached to that. Like it just naturally
It's phenomenal. Yes. It's phenomenal.
Just like rainbow, it's
and so to treat all of this phenomenal equally, the equality of phenomena, to be able to view that, and then everything becomes, you recognize it for its temporariness. And why cling on to something that is temporary?
Yeah.
Amen, Lance. Amen. There's no suffering if you're not clinging
Okay.
or grasping.
Okay, so then it says, infinitely diminished, in harmony with the law of decay, they cease. Infinitely diminished. So it keeps on diminishing. The more we look at it, the least important it becomes, the less important it becomes. And then in harmony with the law of decay, that this is the nature of impermanence. This is the nature of temporariness, is that it goes away. It doesn't last. It's not permanent. It's going to go away. And then whatever it is, it begins to cease. There's the cessation. And why chase after that?
Yeah, I think it's like the other way to put it is like eventually all the universe becomes like, black hole, and even black holes, they do evaporate and it becomes nothing. That's the modern thought, modern way of thinking.
So then the next
things, but in small things, we can say like everything really like falls apart. Everything becomes like victim to chaos. Everything eventually disintegrates. I mean, unless there is some input to the system from outside, but
well, the other way of looking at it, that everything becomes victim of complication.
Yeah.
We become victims of the complication.
Yeah, in the way that
the next line in the next verse, .85 says, through conceptual thinking, which is superficial, ignorance arises. It has no other source. And ignorance is the first of the 12 links. Through conceptual thinking, if we can agree that it's superficial, ignorance arises, no other source. You look at something, you see it one way. I look at something, so I see it another way. Brendan looks at it and sees it yet another way. And it's all our concept. Each of us is having a concept, but it's all superficial.
Yeah, we're trying to put things in our own little box.
Right.
And think, oh, that box explains everything.
So, and then it says, so the ignorance arises. Replace the word ignorance with delusion. Now, I'm delusional about this, that, or the other thing, and you're delusional about the same thing, looking at it, but you have a whole different delusion about it.
Yeah.
as does everyone else looking at the same thing.
What does this do to reason, to the concept of reason? So Alex started talking about concepts in terms of scientific concepts, in terms of physics. So I'll throw another one at you that I rely on a lot. It's my training as an historian. I have a concept, and I believe that a lot of people don't understand how to analyze history. They use their own modern day political prejudices or their own modern day, well, my ancestors couldn't have done anything like that. They were good people. You know, we project what we want rather than looking at what the primary sources say. So that's a concept I rely on. But are we saying that ultimately a concept like that is flawed, that's not reasonable?
Well, the potential is certainly there, and we can't get there yet in this conversation without missing some of these other points, and we have to establish this firm foundation here. So what you're asking is completely valid. We're going to get there, but we got to establish this firm ground.
I wanted to add to that. So even though we're saying that we're perceiving reality in a delusional way, that we're like just perceiving our projections, we have to remind ourselves that those are real projections. So even though you're perceiving an automobile, and you know that an automobile is just a projection of a bunch of parts put together, and you're projecting it, so it doesn't really exist. But if you stand in front of a moving automobile, you'll get killed just the same. So we have to distinguish between, saying that we're not seeing the way the reality exists, but also realizing that the reality does exist in a certain level in that way, in a very real way, as far as our physical bodies are concerned.
So the answer to that, I think, is the word value. What value do these projections have? What value do these conventions have to us individually and collectively? And that comes later. We have to establish this understanding first before we can get to assigning values. And values come from imputed, meaning or something like that. Designations, designating it as good or bad.
Well, it's a very tricky point if we're trying to understand egolessness and emptiness. Generally, we're talking about emptiness here. But the point is that we're not rejecting truth. We're seeing it as merely conventional. And as conventional, it's something that we can use when we need to use it, but it's not something which is ultimately true. And I can come up with a lot of examples from physics, which people these days take to be the base reality of everything. And that a lot of the laws of physics rely on idealizations of reality, simplifications of reality to make them mathematically treatable. And they don't exist in reality, but they're useful. The laws of physics, because they're mathematical, they're only approximations to the reality. Then they ignore all the funny little details, but they're good enough that we can make predictions from them and find them useful and so on. And I think the same thing probably applies to chemistry and all the other sciences. We shouldn't be hypnotized by the success of science into thinking that what science tells us is what's ultimately real. It's useful in a very pragmatic sense, but it's dealing with idealizations, simplifications, mathematical models that have no existence in reality.
Yeah, abstraction, we call that.
Abstractions, really. Abstractions, yes. So, we shouldn't think that, we can have concepts, we can find them useful, we can find them even essential for our daily life, but that doesn't make them absolutely true. So that's really the point of view of Buddhism. We can accept things as conventions, as useful, as pragmatic, but it doesn't mean that they're ultimately or absolutely true.
Okay, so let's go in this verse that we're on right now, 85.85, and go to the next two sentences, because I think this is what Bernie was just saying. It says, when you eliminate the cause of formations, the cause of formations, when you eliminate that, there's no passing on. Okay? And then the next line says, consciousness arises dependent on passing on. So consciousness is, I can be conscious of a formation that no longer is in my view, but I have a consciousness of it. I turn the heat up and I don't see the heat, but I can feel the heat. I have a consciousness of the heat, and I can describe that. I can talk to other people about it in different ways. Oh, the warmth. Oh, I can take my shirt off. It's more comfortable this way, and so on like that. So consciousness arises dependent on passing on. That I can transmit to myself thoughts that come and thoughts that stay, thoughts that go to myself, and I can also relate it to you. And you can relate your thoughts back to me. We can have a conversation through consciousness. If there was no consciousness, there'd be no conversation.
So passing on here is meant that, like, the consciousness cannot be existing in isolation. It basically, consciousness can only be consciousness when it has somebody to talk to, like to exchange the information or the ideas.
Well, I think so. It's a relative manifestation of mind. It's, to put it in other words, it's a concretion, making concrete thoughts of mine through this consciousness. So I can describe something, I can paint words to you and you understand what I'm talking about. I think that's exactly what we're trying to do right now. We're trying to take the words of the Buddha 2,600 years ago, and we're trying to make that relative to our experience now in a very, very fundamental way.
Okay, I have to say I'm confused here by the phrase passing on.
Okay.
I don't know exactly what he means by the phrase there is no passing on.
I
I
take
heard
it.
your interpretation, but I have no idea whether that is what the text
Well,
means.
fair enough. Circle it, and we'll come back to it then.
Yeah.
Let's not dissect that which can't be
Yes.
dissected.
Consciousness arises dependent on passing on. So maybe it's one of the 12 links or something.
Well,
What does consciousness arise dependent on in terms of the 12-fold links? Let me see.
well, if you look at it, consciousness is the third of the 12 links, and the fourth one, the next one, is the form body.
Right, formations. No, name and form or let me see.
The form body.
Let me see. Consciousness, I don't have these things memorized, unfortunately.
Well, that's
So,
why
yeah,
I write these
consciousness
things
arises
down.
from formations. Consciousness arises from formations, and that arises from ignorance, right? Ignorance, formations, consciousness. But passing on is not formations or something. So, yeah, my theory is incorrect. I don't know. I don't know.
All
what
right,
the-
well, let's come back to it. We don't have to, be definitive about each and everything at this point.
No. Yeah, sure.
We're
But
opening our
just to be
minds.
sure,
We're opening our minds to another way of looking at things at a very fundamental level.
Yeah.
but just to be sure, he's not talking about like passing on in terms of like dying
Dying.
or
I don't think so. That doesn't make much sense.
I look at it as a conversation. Consciousness is expressed through a conversation, and you're passing on ideas, concepts from one person to another.
That makes a kind of sense, but I'm not absolutely sure that's what the text means. Makes sense, but I'm not sure that's what
All
the
right,
author.
well, let's move on
Yes,
because we don't
yeah.
have all night, and let's see if we.
Sure, sure.
So the next one is dot 86. It says, likewise, name and form appear from consciousness. So here's from name and form, the six sense fields appear. The six sense fields. So that's the eyes and the hearing and the smelling and so on like that. When joined with these six, what?
I mean, here I'm a bit struggling. Like, why would sense fields appear from those concepts, from form?
Well, let's look at it like a baby. Let's look at it if you're an infant and you're born in total ignorance. And then as your mother begins to come and taking care of you and your parents and so on like that, you begin to associate certain perceptions of your mother and your father and so on like that. You hear their voice, so on. You perceive, oh, here's that sound that I've heard before. Here's that light that I've seen before, and I'm going to get something to eat.
Mm-hmm.
And then you begin to become aware of your surroundings a little bit more. Maybe you begin to realize, oh, there's sunshine coming in, there's heat coming in, and I'm conscious of that. Oh, I'm conscious that it's daytime, I'm conscious that it's nighttime, but you have no way to be able to explain that to yourself at this point. But you become conscious of these things. You become conscious that your mother is feeding you and you're feeling better, or that you're wet and your mother is coming in and changing your clothing because you soiled yourself and so on, and now you're feeling better. Your whole mood changes. You were miserable 5 minutes ago, but now you're feeling better. So there's a sequence here. And then the next one is the form body. You begin to recognize your own body. You begin to play with your toes. You begin to play with your fingers. You begin to do things. When, if you have a child, you see your baby growing and you see that they go through these stages and so on. He's recognizing himself. And then finally, they get down to their genitals, and boy, do they start having fun then. So it's a progression. And then the next one is the six sense realms. Now you're putting together the eyes, you're putting together the hearing, you're putting together the taste and the smell and the touching. So all this is all coming together, all within. It's diffusing the ignorance. It's substantiating the mental formations that we've already gone through. It's developing more consciousness. It's we're becoming, we're realizing this physicality of things, and we're sensing things through our sense fields, the ayatenas. So we're beginning to recognize that. And then contact is next, and contact is the relationship that you're building with your environment, with your bedroom, your crib, your mattress, your parents, when they come and they pick you up and hold you and so on like that. You're developing the contact of being with those. If you're left by yourself and if you're deprived of that sense deprivation, it becomes, some people would say this becomes the seeds for neuroses, if not maybe even psychosis. That this begins at the very, very early stages. And then after that is the sensation of the feelings that we develop, these emotional feelings. The emotional feelings develop out of that. And then comes the craving, then comes the clinging, the beginning, the becoming, the birth, old age, and death that we haven't gotten to yet. So if you look at this as a wheel, and this is on the circumference of the wheel of existence, the 6 realms of being a human being. Remember, there's the 12 links of dependent origination. And now we're seeing, the Buddha is explaining this for the first time. He's discovered this and discovered a way to be able to articulate this. It's revolutionary. Nobody had done this before.
Yeah.
This was his gift.
Yeah, and actually, I think we keep rediscovering this truth. And if you look at modern neuroscience, for example, it's now coming to understanding that each sense is not born on its own. Like for us to develop sense of touch or sense of hearing, we have to have sounds. So if there are no sounds, we cannot really develop complete hearing. If there is no touch, the nerves will not grow to the surface of our skin and develop sensation.
Well, that's true. And so there's 3 things.
Light.
There's the skandhas.
Yeah.
There are the dhatus and the ayatanas. The skandhas are those heaps, are these things that we're talking about here as a being. The dhatu is the realm in which the world in which this is happening. And the sense field is the relationship, is the actual activity of those organs working within the sense fields that are reporting back to the aggregate.
Yeah, generally, dhatus, well, it can be translated various ways, but in the context we're speaking of here, usually it's translated as elements, referring to the physical things that we actually see. Which, I mean, the basic science of ancient India is not the same as science now, but they did, at least in the early Buddhism, they believed that there was a physical world that we actually perceive. So,
yeah, and so the definition I'm familiar with dhatu is a world or a realm, whatever.
A realm is another translation for dhatu.
It can be very small. It can be huge.
But it's like Dharma, it's a word with more than one meaning. So it's element or realm. Realm is often correct depending on the context.
Okay.
All right, can we continue? So we were joined with the 6, I'm on dot 86, the 3rd line. It says, when joined with these 6 sense fields, it can be said that contact appears. Contact appears. I'm touching something. I'm hearing something. I'm feeling something. That contact appears, and contact produces 3 kinds of feelings. So what are the 3 feelings of contact? It's good, it's bad, or you're indifferent about it. It's very simple. But we're building up here. We're building up of what it is to be a human being. So then the next one is point 87. It says, even the smallest feeling is said to be accompanied by craving. And craving produces all forms of clinging. The clinging in turn perpetuates all existence, and based on existence, one's birth occurs. So this existence, of course, is a temporary existence. It is an illusion, that it is permanent. And we seek it. We want it more and more. And as we develop, as we get older, as that infant is going through all these stages, we want this life. We don't want to lose this life. And survival becomes an important factor in our behavior, in the family dynamic, in school dynamic, in friendships, and so on like that, going out in the world. We want to survive. What do we do in order to survive? Do we compromise ourselves sometimes? We say, oh, I didn't do that, when you did it. But, if you say I did it, and you're going to get a whipping or something like that. So in your mind, to survive without being whipped, you say, oh, I didn't do it. So you start creating further delusions.
We give away the present day through worry to try to protect that future, right, Lance?
Yes, exactly.
And we rob ourselves of the present that we as good Buddhists know is all we have.
Exactly. Of the freedom. Then we become imprisoned by our guilt and so on like that. Our emotions.
Yeah, it's like when we have some experience that repeated over and over, and now we start thinking, oh, this is how things should be. This is how I should be. This is how, this is what is probably good for me,
And this is the convention of life. This is what my culture is. And you get comfortable in your culture. And then when, an invading culture comes in and so on, the values are in conflict with each other.
Yeah. And then it becomes negative. Okay. Negative feeling.
So then the next one, dot 88, says, rooted in birth, the stages of old age, sickness, and death follow. Rooted in birth. We got to be born first, right? And then we have old age, sickness, and death. In this web of existence, there are many types of birth. Likewise, all beings appear from conditions, with no self or person who transmigrates. Let me say that again. Likewise, all beings appear from conditions, with no self or person who transmigrates. No self or person who transmigrates. So in other words, we impute that this is interesting.
I mean, isn't that kind of conflicting with general Hindu kind of philosophy? Is it, or is it?
What do you mean, that the Hindu exists?
Yeah, like in Hindu, there is like basically a soul, like who reincarnates from one to another. Is that?
Well, and isn't, yes, exactly. Yes, thank you. Yes, a soul.
So.
A soul. And that's one of the things that the evolution of Hindu thought is in the Buddhism, where the soul can be transcended. We see the soul as a conceptual device that imprisons us. as a human being. Oh, I'm going to be reborn as a human being. I got to do all this to make sure I'm born as a noble human being. And if I don't, I'm going to be born as a hellish human being. It's all the soul, isn't it? That's the transmigration of the person or the soul. In Buddhism, we transcend that.
So it's like, because we believe there is a soul, we're going to be reborn as something.
Correct.
Like
That's the
believe-
eternalism. That's the extreme of eternalism. You're going to be born again.
right, so like if we believe that we do something good, we accumulate good karma, we're going to be reborn as a god or demigod.
And if you do bad stuff, you're going to be born a hell being.
And helping, yes. And because we believe those things gonna happen and we do those things, that actually happens to us, right?
Yeah.
But if we cease to do all these good things or bad things, then we kind of break free from this cycling.
And that's what the purification of the 12 bhumis are, or the 10 bhumis, excuse me, the 10 bhumis. The purification of the human being to get to the point of being able to overcome, to transcend his mind, to transcend his wisdom obstruction. I've got to know what this is. And that's what binds him to being a human being, binds him to the soul.
I bet this sounds very radical to the Hindu 2,000 years ago.
I'm sure it sounds radical, to us now. What do you think about that, Brendan?
So I'm looking at with no self or person who transmigrates.
Right.
And so I'm going to throw out all the different thoughts I have on this very briefly. I was reading a book from a Zen perspective, and the author of this book seemed to be saying that not all Zen practitioners believe in reincarnation, and not all Zen practitioners believe in enlightenment. Now, not all, okay? So I was very surprised to read that. But what he was saying about reincarnation is, think about the ocean and waves on the ocean, right? Every single wave is a distinct wave. It's all water. So if you think, well, the water is going to keep being reborn, yeah, but it's not me. It's not the aggregate of me. So that was the Zen perspective that I picked up in this book. And when I read that in the Sutra, it seems to support that Zen perspective. Now, I think maybe I'm putting this wall between Tibetan and Zen, which maybe doesn't really exist except in my own mind, but it would seem that this is saying that there is no self or person who transmigrates. So I don't really need to worry about my karma because there is no soul. There is no transmigration. It's more like that Zen perspective. So maybe I've got a lot of wrong thought here. That's just what I was thinking about.
I'd like to hear what Kunga has to say about it.
So I agree with what you're saying about the wave and the ocean, but I don't agree that your past actions don't still have effects on you in the future. I know that's explained in a lot of different ways, that somehow there's this karmic energy that stays with you and affects some aspect of your experience later. I think that, right now I can look at pictures of myself as a child, and that's a whole different person. I can say, oh, well, has my name on there, and maybe we share some features, but I have no idea what that child was thinking. I can make up some memories, I guess, but it's like a whole nother being. And, the only reason I've had more continuity between myself now and myself yesterday morning is because I think that things are happening closer together, and there's less obvious differences. It's not enough time. I kind of momentum makes me see similarities. But I think that's the issue, though, is that you're not just you may be you're certainly not a separate self, right? That's just a delusion. But somehow there is some type of, I think they describe it as a match being lit to another match, that there's some types of some type of connection from these different lives. It's not like what we would think, like, well, if I get reborn as an animal, then I'm just gonna be zipped up in a dog suit.
Exactly what I was getting at. Thank you. Sorry
Yeah,
to interrupt.
you're gonna really be that animal. You're gonna really be that thing. That's just gonna be your experience. You're not gonna have this experience anymore. You're not gonna experience yourself being something else. You're just gonna be that other experience, and that other experience is gonna be somehow connected or influenced by the actions you're having now. Right. That's my understanding. Thank you.
Anybody else have a comment, Bernie?
Well, this is the analogy that it's that I always heard for the transference of self. It's like the self is like a candle that's burning. The flame seems to be constant, but it's really changing from moment to moment. The old saying of Heraclitus, you can't step into the same river twice. And the transfer of consciousness between lives is like one candle lighting another candle. So the flame isn't any kind of permanent thing. It only has a momentary existence, but it has the appearance of lasting. It's the same flame that you see right now that was on the candle 10 minutes ago, when in reality it's completely different in terms of its chemical and physical makeup. That's just an analogy, but it's the same kind of thing. So yeah, because there's a continuity of a flow, and the flow, of course, is just our thoughts. We take that continuity of the flow as being a single thing, which is permanent, which lasts and is either contains the flow or is behind the flow or something like that, where that's not a real accurate description of what's actually going on in your mind. And that agrees with what modern science says. Modern science can't find anything which is permanent or lasting in the mind either, apart from memories, of course. But yeah, that's the Buddhist point of view, as I understand it.
All right. Zara, let me ask you, are you still with us? Do you have a comment on this topic?
Well, I don't want to distract because I know we're short on time, but basically all of this stuff resonates with what I'm doing right now with the retreat with Drupal, um, impermanence and karma. So your seed karma follows you wherever you go, like a shadow. So even though you may zip into another suit, a dog, or another version of what we call Lance, your seed karma, your habitual tendencies, which are formed by your body and your sense desires, have to get resolved. The compulsions have to get resolved in order for you to finally let go of it and not need to get back into a physical form. That's basically what everyone is saying in some form or fashion. But I don't want to distract because I know we're short on time. I'm agreeing with what everyone is saying.
Okay, thank you. Alex, what do you have to say?
The only thing I'm struggling here is what about like the memory of past lives, and the Buddha had them, and many other people kind of report them. Like, are they real? Are they sort of like, maybe these are not really past lives? Maybe these like imaginative worlds or something of some sort.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting question, but
Yeah, yeah. Like
how
if
did how do how could memories possibly exists from life to life. There's enough examples of uh, kids that do have memories of their previous lives that we know that it's not merely a fiction. There's many there's people who go around collecting stories of reincarnations, and if you
Yeah, and
study
I,
the
I kind of
question,
read those too.
that yeah, they are people, generally they're most common in cases where the person died violently in the previous life rather than died of old age, the memories persisting. How it could persist between lifetimes, I have no idea. I'm not
All right.
pretending to know.
Well,
Know
I want to
so
move on, but I just want to make a statement, and that is, I love you all, and I don't want you to suffer.
yes.
If I could, I'd put my arms around you and hug you all. But what we're all trying to do is to defend the illusion. We're all speaking in terms of actuality. We're all speaking in terms of this is what it is. And we're using all different kinds of references to try and prove our points when the actual answer is we don't know. And that's the
Well,
freedom. And that's the freedom.
we're not
That
certain for sure. We're not certain.
we have observations. We take observations and we jump to conclusions with our observations.
Sure.
And but when we get to that fundamental point of I don't know and be able to abide within that and be happy within that. I mean, that's the freedom that we seek. And not to be, torturing ourselves by trying to figure this out and say that this is it and have this meditative experience and now all of a sudden I got the answer to all these things. The answer is we don't know. And that's all, and that's very difficult. And that's why we come away with this experience. When we do have that kind of an experience, that we come away with it with love. Because the love is in the not knowing and loving each other, and it's the compassion. The love is the other side of compassion. The two go together. And having the compassion, for the suffering, for those who remain in delusion. And it's not really validated in each one of us until we have that kind of an experience.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and
It's
I
just
mean, this is
it's
a
just
beautiful word.
It's just vicarious experience, And again, what I don't mean to cut you off, Alex, but what the Buddha is trying to show us, I mean, from the very beginning of his experience, has been to show us how he got to that point. Not he can't give you that freedom. He can't give you that. You can only give yourself that. Alex?
Yeah, thank you. I was going to like bring up what Kunga just said about us like waking up next day, and we can feel like a totally different person, and we may not only feel as a totally different person, but we may be a totally different person because we had some dream and we had some insight, and suddenly, well, we decide, oh, I'm not gonna eat meat anymore. I'm now vegetarian, or something like that. I'm not gonna hate that person. I forgive that person, or like I accept love of that person. Like we can be very different person from day to day, or from night to day, or from season to season, or year to year, and life to life. And maybe we should think of this. Okay, like we're going to be reborn. It's temporary aggregates, but who we really are, well, that is going to flow. That's going to flow like flame is going to go from one candle to another, like water on the river, go from one side to another. Um, there is inside ourselves there is very little permanence
All
actually.
right, well, let me cut you off because we're running out of time, and I'd like to be able to finish as much
Yeah,
of
that's
this
all
as
I
we
have to
can.
say.
So we go to the next verse, point 89. And what does it say? It says, whoever has no thought or concept has found the true way. Whoever has found the true way has no ignorance. Whoever has brought this ignorance to a halt has exhausted all forms of existence for good. For good means for eternity, or however you want to express that. So, in other words, it's kind of negating the whole human experience as being just an experience of recognizing our conundrum of what reality is. He's not offering an explanation of reality here, but just being able to say, well, as long as you're thinking about it, you're missing the point. So then the next one, the awakened one, the thus gone one, the self arisen one, all phrases that explain Buddha, that we all have the potential within ourselves. Never lose sight of that. That you are Buddha, you are potential Buddha. You can do this. Whoever, has severed this causation within himself, the awakened one, or the thus gone one, the self arisen one, has severed this causation within themselves, this causation for concept, this causation for thought. Buddha can only mean someone who knows all causality. It does not refer to the aggregates, the sense sources, and elements.
Yeah,
One of
that
the
kind of
things
explains
about
that.
samadhi, the king of samadhi, is to stop the conceptual elaboration. Here's a statement, and as soon as we hear that, we want to elaborate on it, and it just it tightens up the net.
Yeah, it's kind of saying basically like if we accept things for what they are, and we don't make stuff up more than what things are, just be with those things, uh, we'll be closer to absolute truth rather than trying to build up relative truth and trying to understand what is absolute truth based on relative truth.
Anybody else have a comment you want to make?
I would comment that you just can't make yourself not see things. You can't make yourself not conceptualize. There's, you have habits in your mind of how you perceive reality, and you have to work with those habits, and we do that through our meditation practice, I think. But it's not something you can just come to and say, well, I'm not gonna see my, you know, my I'm not gonna like or not like that anymore, or I'm not gonna think that that person's being mean to me anymore. Those things kind of come unbidden, and you have to work with your practice, I
Well,
think.
can I ask you this? But can you come to terms with the temporariness of all those things and be able to let it go? In other words, not to be clinging to it.
With practice. I mean, I think you have to put the effort into it. don't
I
think
mean,
it's
do
going
you
to come
agree
just
with the
because you want it to
premise?
be.
Do you agree with the premise that to be a human being and phenomenal nature is to be clinging, is to do these things, and to be free of that is the goal that we're seeking by being Buddhists. We're looking for that which we call enlightenment or whatever, and here it is. But if we keep on rationalizing the phenomena, you know, and doing it in terms that are other than, well, it's here now, I'm going to enjoy it now, but I'm not going to be hung up on it. I'm ready to give it up at any time.
Yeah, one thing to say it, another thing to do it.
Certainly. But does that diminish the point?
I think it just we just have to be careful about making it sound like it's an easy thing to do. Like, oh, we just have to make up our minds to think differently about these things, you know?
Okay. Anybody else have a comment? Okay, so we'll move on. So point 91 now, verse point 91 is, there is no place here for the heretics of other schools. What does that mean? Here in such a practice of the Dharma, the emptiness has been proclaimed. Those beings who are fortunate enough to understand this teaching are those who studied and were purified under previous Buddhas. When the wheel of Dharma has turned with its 12 aspects, Kaldandinya understood the meaning, and so the three jewels came to be, the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. But just going back here, it said that there's no place for heretics of other schools.
Well, these are the essential Buddhist points of view, and if other schools accepted them, then they would be Buddhists as well. It's because they don't accept them that what Buddha discovered under the Bodhi tree that they aren't Buddhists. Heretics is a bit strong word, but I don't like it. But there's really no such thing as heresy in Buddhism, because these aren't people who fell away from Buddhism and took to another view. They're just people with different philosophical or religious views. And Buddha has his specific views, which has to do with, the three marks of existence: impermanence, egolessness, and suffering. And other schools don't accept that. So, and
So
of course, emptiness.
are the heretics of those schools that as they begin to delve into the Dharma, they become heretics in that school that they come from, but not
No,
necessarily heretics of Buddhism. We're not talking about heretics of Buddhism.
no, it's just the word that they're translating as heretics. That means people who follow other teachers. There were probably thousands of yogis teaching all sorts of different views at the time in India, and Buddha was proclaiming his view for the first time. And of course, students of other teachers didn't exist it because they couldn't have heard it yet. Only these five disciples could possibly have heard what the Buddha had to say so far.
I mean, to me, it looks quite clear because, I mean, Buddha is talking about cessation of conceptual thought. And there is only one way to do sensation. It's just to stop it. So there is, I mean, there is, I mean, the different ways to stop it or different paths to stop it, but the final result is no conceptual thinking. And that basically that's what he's saying. Like, if you stop your conceptual thinking, no matter where you're coming from, you're a Buddha. It doesn't matter where you're coming from. Eventually everybody got to the same place.
Right, and there's many methods to do that, but ultimately it comes down to that,
Yeah. So there are, I think that perhaps where we can say that, or why we can say that, like, all religions are tolerable, I mean, accepted in Buddhism, because one way or another they come close to this point.
So let me put this question out there. Does the cessation come from the deathbed or the cushion?
What? Sensation is
Cessation.
everything.
The cessation, the
Oh,
stoppage.
cessation,
The
cessation.
cessation, the stoppage. Does it come from the deathbed or does it come from the cushion?
Or it could happen at the cushion, but not necessarily. There are plenty of stories of uh, monks attaining enlightenment at all sorts of different moments, not necessarily while they were meditating.
Well,
Although meditation,
it's a figurative
meditation,
it's a figure of speech.
sure, okay.
You
I'm
know,
taking it too literally.
yeah.
Yeah,
I
well,
mean,
there's two types in Buddhism. There's two types of cessation. There's the cessation when you first attain enlightenment, and then for an arhat, there's considered the cessation at the moment of death. So there's two. There's Nirodha. Nirodha, I can't even remember the Sanskrit names. With remainder or without remainder is how it's usually translated. So they're both true.
so do we decide that we're not going to be born again as any being at all? This is our last life,
Well,
so to speak, or is it something that comes from a an attitude of consciousness? You know, figuratively out of meditation. You know, sitting on the cushion. That's where it stops.
well, this is the whole idea of an arhat versus a bodhisattva. An arhat has the wisdom, but it lacks the deep compassion of a bodhisattva. So, I mean, it's like being smart. The smarter you are, the stupider other people seem, you know? And the more enlightened you are, the less, the more confused other beings seem. So it can get to the point where you just want to isolate yourself from the common man because they're just so confused. So without compassion, that can definitely happen. And at that point, you want to turn to a, a situation without rebirth. So that's the kind of trap might be a little too strong word, but that's the kind of situation that the Arhat finds himself in because he emphasized wisdom so much and not compassion, not strongly enough, he falls into a one-sided understanding of what nirvana is.
So, coming to point 92, and it says, when the wheel of Dharma has turned with its 12 aspects, which we've just gone through, Kaulandinya understood the meaning, and so the three jewels came to be, the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. Those are the three jewels, even up to the palace of Brahma. The news went out from person to person. So what are the three jewels? The three jewels, the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. The body, the speech, and the mind of the enlightened one. And that we all have that potential within ourselves. Those are the three jewels. Om Mani Padme Hum, loosely translated as "Behold the jewel in the lotus." We are the jewel. We are all three jewels. We have that potential, and this is what's being revealed to us. This is what's being expressed, and so the subsequent verses, a few verses here, is that this is being celebrated by the gods. You know, yeah, there it is. Here it is. This is it.
In that Dhammadorja, when I read that, I see it though as more concrete. I mean, the Buddha just gave his first teaching and had someone understand it. So the Buddha just became enlightened. He taught the Dharma, and now someone understood it. So now there's a Sangha. That's how I see it more literal.
Sure. It can be taken, as in the microcosm or the macrocosm, individually or the collective. Either way, it's all valid. And when you can see it, that it's that dynamic, in phenomenal nature, we can see it that way. In the absolute nature, it just is.
Yeah, this is I agree with Kunga. This is a kind of like highlight in this moment. The students sort of confirmed, basically. I mean, once the Buddha's experience got confirmed, which means they internalized it, and now they also became Buddhas, or soon to become Buddhas. That's kind of the creation of the three jewels.
I mean, at this point, I don't think it says that they themselves became enlightened, but it purified the eye of Dharma. The last line on that page, point 95, it says, along with the 60 million gods, purified their eye of Dharma. The 5 monks and the rest purified their eye of Dharma. They now had a vision of what the Dharma is.
Yeah, and if they have the vision, and if the vision is correct, then they should be like very quickly reaching the final goal, like relatively.
Depends on their karma, right? Depends on how much they're prepared for that.
Right.
It depends on their subsequent, practice or whatever you want to call it, to let go, for them to find their own freedom, for them to become liberated. No doubt Siddhartha Gautama, Shakyamuni Buddha, brought these great teachings, his great experience, to lead us to this. But still, we have to do the work ourselves, don't we?
Yeah.
And it was his gift because we don't know why. We call him the Buddha, whatever. He's the embodiment of all this wisdom and bodhicitta, all this, and it's part of the phenomenal nature that he should be manifest. And, do we need to do anything more than just accept it for what it is and find the reality of it in our own experience?
I think we should do more than just hear it.
What's that?
We should probably do a little bit more than just hear it. Indeed. But, yeah. Right.
Oh, we have the Eightfold Path.
Yeah. In dot 97, it says the 84,000 humans who had congregated there purified their eyes and were liberated from all unfavorable rebirths. From all unfavorable rebirths. Not that they were not being reborn, but that they're being reborn in a way that they can continue. In other words, say they're 30 years old. They hear this and now they have the next 50 or 60 years of their life now to be able to become the embodiment of this themselves, to be able to liberate themselves. You know, if we start thinking that this is our only life and that we don't know if there's a life after this, if we start thinking this is the life, you know, this is one thing, you know, in the Christian tradition, you know, this is the only life you got. It's what you do in this life that matters.
Wow.
And if we're postponing that and saying, oh, well, I'm on the path, I'm 70% there, I'll have another life, I'll have 3 more lives, and I'll be able to be purified, and I'll be able to be enlightened or something like that. Isn't that one of the promises of Buddhist philosophy? You know, you reach this point and you're 3 lifetimes away. Yeah, it's eternalism.
Yeah.
And how many people hold on to that? They cling on to that.
I want to make an observation. We were talking about the 12-link chain of interdependent origination,
Yes.
and you know, you were giving that example of that being like from a child to an adult, but you know, we also think about that just happening every moment. So every
Correct.
moment there's a birth and death.
Absolutely.
So your prior lives were just in the last 5 minutes. How many prior lives have you already had?
Exactly.
Yeah, well, I heard something recently that said there's 64 turns of the thought in a snap of a fingers. So, you know, how many thoughts have we had in the last, you know, hour and a half, almost 2 hours? How many lives have we already just lived in the time we've been sitting here?
Right. That's the application. That's the logical application, what you just said. Every moment, every meditation is a birth and death, a rebirth.
Yeah.
Well, anybody have any last thoughts you want to make? Zara, you want to say anything before we sign off?
Nope, I don't have anything to say. Thank you, everybody, for your time.
Thank you for being here. And I think each of us in our own way is on the path, no doubt about that. You know, we're all dealing with our causes and circumstances. And we're all, you know, have the best intentions, no doubt, for ourselves and for our families and so on. And that's all part of the good deeds that we do. So we need to appreciate that.
So maybe we could, as a final touch on this, kind of elaborate a little bit or put substance in what is meant by the vision was purified, or the 84 humans purified their eyes and were
Right.
liberated from unfavorable rebirth.
Well, in the Eightfold Path, the first of the Eightfold Path is the right view, the right vision.
Yeah, the right view. Okay, so that's,
So how do you define that?
yeah.
So, and, you know, each one of us probably is going to have our own definition of that, you know, and that's all okay, you know. Mine is freedom. I distill it down to freedom.
Well, I mean, but if it's more concrete, I mean, are they talking about that they now realized what is the path to, what is that path to cease suffering? What is the path for um
I don't know.
freedom?
We only
liberation.
have what we've read so far to be able to explain that. So we need to use our empathetic joy to be able to commiserate with that, to be able to relate to that. This is the relative world.
Yeah, so
All right, well, I think we need to leave it here because it's 9 o'clock. And so thank you all very much for being part of this, and we'll continue next time. And things continue to be interesting. But I think the fundamental teachings in these last two sessions that we've had, I think, are so fundamental, so basic to everything else. We really had to establish these because everything gets referred back to this.
yeah, for me, it really helps to put in very vivid context many teachings that I heard before, and now like a lot of some of these concepts that were a little bit cloudy or nebulous, or like I was not sure what is the meaning of the word. These discussions really help to put it in more tangible framework, and be a little bit more confident about what I'm understanding or not understanding.
Okay, we'll have plenty of time to talk about more stuff. Thank you all. By the virtues collected in the three times, by myself and all beings in samsara and nirvana, and by the innate word of virtue, may I and all sentient beings quickly attain unsurpassed, perfect, complete, precious enlightenment. May the teachings of the great Tri Kumpal Ratna Shri, who is omniscient, Lord of the Dharma, master of interdependence, continue and increase through study, practice, contemplation, and meditation until the end of samsara, and all the other great masters. Om, Ah, Hong. Om, Ah, Hong. Om, Ah, Hong. May my body, speech, and mind become inseparable with the body, speech, and mind of all the enlightened ones for the benefit of all sentient beings. Thank you, brothers and sister. Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Bernie.
Everyone.
Okay. Have a good night. See you all soon.